Today, I want to talk about a feeling many of us recognize, even if we rarely put it into words, that quiet emptiness that sometimes arrives after work, after effort, after a long day of trying to be capable, useful, and present. I speak softly as I begin because this feeling does not shout. It does not demand attention. It simply sits beside us like a shadow that becomes more visible when the room grows quiet. You might be listening in the morning, or late at night, or on your way home, and wherever you are, I invite you to settle in, not with tension, but with curiosity, as if we are two people walking slowly along the same path. I often think about the end of the workday as a moment that reveals something true about us. In the classroom where I teach English, the final minutes before everyone leaves are usually filled with a strange mix of relief and fatigue. The students pack their notebooks, zip their bags, and exchange small smiles that say, "We made it through another day." I remember one particular evening when the sky outside was the color of faded copper, not bright, not dark, but somewhere in between. I stayed behind for a few minutes after everyone had gone, standing near the window, watching the last traces of daylight stretch across the rooftops. My body felt tired, but my mind felt unusually hollow, like a room that had been filled with furniture all day and suddenly emptied in silence. On my way home, I took the train, the same train I take most days. The carriage was crowded yet strangely quiet, as if each person carried their own private bubble of exhaustion. I held onto the metal pole and watched faces pass by, some staring at their phones, others gazing out of the window with distant eyes. I noticed my reflection in the glass, layered over the blurred city lights, and for a moment I barely recognized myself. I looked composed, professional, still standing, still breathing, yet inside I felt something missing, something drained. I asked myself softly, not out of panic, but out of honest wondering, why do I feel empty after work? As the train moved, I thought about the hours that had just passed. I had spoken, listened, corrected, encouraged, smiled, and remained patient. I had given pieces of my energy to many people, and they had given some back in their own way. Yet when I finally had time for myself, there was this quiet vacancy. It was not sadness exactly, not disappointment, just a subtle absence, like finishing a meal and realizing you are no longer hungry, but not quite satisfied either. I leaned my forehead gently against the cool glass and let the rhythm of the train carry me. When I reached my stop, the air outside felt crisp, the kind that makes you inhale a little deeper without thinking. I walked through familiar streets, past small shops with warm light spilling onto the pavement, past a bakery that always smells like butter and sugar in the evening. I could hear distant laughter from a group of friends sitting outside a cafe, and the soft hum of traffic moving somewhere beyond my line of sight. My steps were slow, unhurried, as if my body instinctively knew that rushing would only deepen the emptiness inside. At home, I placed my bag down by the door and stood in the quiet hallway for a moment. There was no one waiting for me, no urgent task, no lesson to prepare, just stillness. I washed my hands and went to the kitchen, where I filled the kettle and watched the water begin to tremble before boiling. I made a cup of tea, simple, ordinary, something I have done countless times. As the steam rose, I felt a small shift inside me, a tiny return of presence, as if the act of caring for myself in this quiet way gently reminded me that I was still here. I carried the tea to the small table by the window and sat down, looking out at the darkening sky. The The city lights were beginning to sparkle like scattered stars. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and felt its heat travel through my palms. In that moment, I realized that part of the emptiness I felt came from giving so much of myself outwardly during the day and forgetting to turn some of that attention inward. I had been present for others, but not for myself. I thought about one of my students, Lena, who had stayed after class earlier that week. She had told me in careful English that she often felt the same way after work. She said, "I am tired, but my mind is still running." I remember how she placed her hand on her chest when she spoke, as if trying to locate the feeling inside her body. I looked at her then with understanding, not as a teacher correcting grammar, but as another human being who knows this sensation too well. I told her that emptiness does not always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it simply means we have been carrying too much without noticing. As I sipped my tea, I reflected on the language we use to describe this feeling. Many people say, "I feel empty." But that phrase can mean different things depending on the person and the day. Sometimes it means I am exhausted but numb. Sometimes it means I have no motivation left. Sometimes it means I need quiet, not more noise. I rolled the words slowly in my mind, feeling their weight and texture. I feel empty. I let them rest there, not as a problem to fix, but as a reality to observe. I remembered another evening years ago when I was younger and less aware of my inner world. I had worked late, rushing from one task to another, proud of my productivity, yet strangely disconnected from myself. I came home, ate without tasting my food, scrolled through my phone, and went to bed feeling restless. The emptiness back then felt sharper, more uncomfortable, because I did not understand it. I thought something was broken inside me, that I should always feel fulfilled if I was working hard. Now, with time and experience, I see that emptiness is often a signal, not of failure, but of imbalance. I leaned back in my chair and allowed my breathing to slow. I noticed how my chest rose and fell, how my shoulders gradually softened. In the silence, I began to think about the small moments during the day when I had ignored my own needs. The times I skipped a sip of water, the moments I rushed instead of pausing, the occasions I smiled automatically rather than honestly. These tiny neglects accumulate, like drops filling a cup, until by evening, the cup feels empty of something essential. I gazed out at the city again and imagined all the people returning home, just like me, carrying their invisible burdens. Some might feel relief, some frustration, some loneliness, and some, like me, a quiet emptiness. I wondered how many of them had the chance to sit still, to breathe, to simply exist without performing. I felt a gentle compassion for them, and for myself, recognizing that this shared human experience connects us more than we often realize. The tea cooled slowly in my hands, and with each sip, I felt a little more grounded. I began to notice small details in my apartment, the texture of the wooden table, the soft glow of the lamp, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. These ordinary sensations anchored me in the present, reminding me that even when I feel empty, I am still surrounded by life, by warmth, by reality. I thought about how we learn English or any language in a similar way. We often focus on speaking correctly, performing well, proving our competence. Much like we do at work, we push ourselves to produce, to impress, to avoid mistakes. But sometimes, after all that effort, we might feel empty too, as if we have been using the language without truly inhabiting it. In those moments, it is not more rules or more vocabulary that we need, but a return to feeling, to listening, to being gentle with ourselves. I remembered walking with another student, Matteo, along a river one afternoon. He had told me that speaking English at work made him feel tense, as if he had to wear a mask. When the day ended, he said, he felt both relieved and strangely hollow. As we walked, we spoke slowly, simply, about the water, the trees, the way light danced on the surface. In that shared quiet, his shoulders relaxed, and his English softened, becoming more natural, more human. I realized then that language, like our emotional energy, flows best when we are not forcing it. As night deepened, I finished my tea and set the mug aside. I placed my hands on the table and felt its solid presence beneath my fingertips. I asked myself again, gently, why do I feel empty after work? And this time, the answer felt clearer. Because I give, and giving is beautiful, but I must also receive. Because I care deeply, and caring requires replenishment. Because I move through my day at a pace that sometimes forgets my own heartbeat. I stood up and walked to the window, resting my palm against the glass. The city stretched out before me, vast and alive, yet I felt no urge to rush back into it. Instead, I embraced the stillness of this moment, letting it refill me bit by bit. I thought about how important it is to create small rituals at the end of the day, simple acts that signal to our body and mind that we are safe, that we are allowed to rest, that we do not have to perform anymore. For me, that ritual might be tea, or a slow walk, or sitting quietly with my thoughts. For you, it might be something different, perhaps a warm shower, listening to music, or simply lying on your back and watching the ceiling. Whatever it is, the key is presence, not distraction. Attention rather than escape. I turned away from the window and sat back down, feeling more whole than I had an hour earlier. The emptiness had not vanished completely, but it had softened, like a cloud slowly dispersing to reveal the sky behind it. I realized that this feeling does not need to be feared or fought. It can be met with kindness, curiosity, and patience. I think about how often we judge ourselves for feeling this way. We tell ourselves we should be grateful, we should be satisfied, we should not feel empty when we have a job, a home, a life. But sometimes, emptiness is simply a human response to a full day. It does not make us ungrateful, it makes us honest. Sometimes I feel this emptiness even after a good day, a successful lesson, a meaningful conversation. It does not mean the day was wasted. It means I gave my energy, and now my body is asking for quiet, for gentleness, for restoration. Maybe you have felt this too, sitting alone after work, wondering why your chest feels hollow even though everything went well. As I reflected, I thought about the phrase, "I gave my best today." It is a simple sentence, but powerful. It acknowledges effort without demanding perfection. It allows us to close the day with dignity rather than guilt. I let those words settle inside me, feeling their warmth and reassurance. I imagined you listening to this, perhaps on your own journey home, perhaps sitting in your room, perhaps lying in bed. I hoped that my words might accompany you like a calm presence, not trying to fix you, but simply keeping you company. I wanted you to know that feeling empty after work does not mean you are broken. It means you are human, sensitive, alive. I walked to my small bookshelf and pulled out a notebook where I sometimes write my thoughts. I opened it to a blank page and wrote slowly, "Today, I felt empty, and that is okay." The act of writing grounded me, transforming an abstract feeling into something tangible. something I could look at without fear. I closed the notebook gently, as if tucking that thought in for the night. I returned to the table and noticed how quiet my apartment had become, the kind of silence that feels spacious rather than lonely. In that silence, I sensed a subtle fullness returning, not dramatic, not loud, just steady and reassuring. It reminded me that emptiness and fullness are not opposites, but part of the same cycle, like inhaling and exhaling, like day turning into night. I thought about the rhythm of our lives, the way we move from effort to rest, from giving to receiving, from noise to quiet. Work is one part of that rhythm, important and meaningful, but not the whole melody. If we only focus on productivity, we risk losing touch with our inner selves, with the gentle voice that asks for care. As I prepared for bed later that night, I carried this awareness with me. I brushed my teeth slowly, noticing the taste of the toothpaste, the sound of the water. I changed into comfortable clothes and felt the softness of the fabric against my skin. I turned off the lights one by one, letting darkness settle in like a blanket. Lying in bed, I placed a hand on my chest and felt my heartbeat steady and alive. I whispered to myself, softly, "You are enough, even when you feel empty." The words floated through the darkness, not as a grand affirmation, but as a quiet truth. I closed my eyes and let sleep come naturally without forcing it. In the morning, when light filtered through the curtains, I woke feeling lighter, as if the emptiness had done its quiet work of cleansing rather than draining. I stretched slowly and breathed deeply, grateful for the new day. I realized that acknowledging the emptiness the night before had allowed me to start again with more clarity, more presence. I think this is what learning English and learning life truly means. It is not about constant achievement, constant fullness, constant brightness. It is about noticing our inner states, giving them language, and treating them with compassion. When we say, "I feel empty after work," we are not complaining. We are practicing awareness. And so, as you go through your own days, I invite you to listen to that quiet feeling when it appears. Do not rush to fill it with noise, with screens, with distraction. Sit with it gently, like I did with my tea, and see what it has to teach you. You might discover that beneath the emptiness lies a need for rest, for connection, for creativity, or simply for silence. I believe that in those moments of stillness, you are not just learning English, you are learning how to notice, how to breathe, how to express your world with honesty and kindness. Your words, spoken or unspoken, become bridges between your inner life and the world around you. As I finish this reflection, I imagine us both standing at the end of our workday, looking out at the fading light, feeling tired yet open, empty yet alive. We are not alone in this experience, even if it sometimes feels that way. We are part of a vast, quiet human story of effort, rest, and renewal. I woke before my alarm the next day, which does not happen often. The room was still half dark, the kind of soft blue that sits between night and morning. And for a moment I simply lay there, listening to the quiet. The emptiness I had felt the evening before was gone, not because I had forced it away, but because I had allowed it to move through me. I felt a different kind of space inside, not hollow, but open, like a window that had been cleaned and now let more light in. I turned onto my side and watched the slow movement of the curtains as a gentle breeze passed through the cracked window. I could hear distant sounds from the city beginning to wake. A bus in the distance, a door closing somewhere below, a bird calling from a rooftop. These small noises felt almost intimate in the early morning, as if the world itself were speaking in a quiet, careful voice. I thought about how different this felt from the noise of the workday, where sounds overlap, blend, and blur until they become background rather than presence. I got out of bed slowly, placing my feet on the cool floor, feeling its solid reality beneath me. I stood there for a few seconds, simply noticing my body, my breathing, my heartbeat. I realized that this was a kind of language too, not spoken, but deeply understood. In that moment, I did not need English or any words at all to know what I felt. Yet, at the same time, I knew that later, when I would speak, teach, and think, language would help me shape this awareness into something meaningful. In the kitchen, I repeated my small ritual of making tea, but this time it felt different. Yesterday, the tea had been a way to soothe the emptiness. Today, it felt like a gentle beginning, a bridge between sleep and action. I watched the water swirl in the cup as the tea steeped, and I noticed how similar this was to the way our thoughts move after work, swirling, settling, slowly becoming clearer. As I sat by the window again, morning light now touching the buildings across the street, I thought about how often we move through our days without really seeing them. We work, we commute, we eat, we sleep, and then we do it all again. The emptiness after work can sometimes be a reminder to slow down, to notice, to reconnect with ourselves rather than simply continuing on autopilot. I remembered another student, Arun, who had once told me that after long days in his office, he felt like a machine that had finally been switched off. He used those exact words in English, slowly, thoughtfully, as if testing them in his mouth before releasing them into the air. "I am like a machine," he said, "and when I stop, there is nothing." I had smiled gently and asked him what he thought might be beneath that nothing. He had paused, looking down at his hands, and after a moment he whispered, "Maybe something human." That conversation stayed with me now as I sipped my tea. I realized that many of us have learned to function efficiently, to perform well, to be reliable, but in doing so, we sometimes forget the softer, slower parts of ourselves. The emptiness after work is not a failure of productivity, but a whisper from our humanity asking to be heard. I stood up and moved around my small apartment, tidying a few things that had been left out the night before. I folded a blanket on the sofa, straightened a stack of books, placed my mug carefully in the sink. These ordinary actions felt almost sacred in the quiet of the morning, each movement deliberate, unhurried. I felt more connected to myself than I had the previous evening, as if the emptiness had cleared space for something new. Later, as I walked to the train, I paid attention to details I might normally overlook. The way sunlight reflected off a puddle on the sidewalk, the rhythm of my footsteps, the subtle warmth of the air against my face. I noticed other people around me too, their expressions less tense than the night before, as if morning offered a fresh start for everyone, even if only briefly. On the train, I did not reach for my phone immediately. Instead, I looked out the window and watched the city slide past in a slow blur of buildings, trees, and sky. I thought about how we often fill every empty moment with distraction, especially after work, as if we are afraid of what might surface in silence. But maybe, I reflected, that silence is exactly what we need. When I arrived at the school, The corridors were still quiet, only a few early students sitting in the waiting area, their voices low and hesitant. I greeted them softly, feeling the calm of the morning still with me. In my classroom, I placed my bag down and stood for a moment at the front, looking at the empty chairs that would soon be filled. I felt grateful for this space, not just as a workplace, but as a place of connection, learning, and shared humanity. As the first class began, I noticed something different in the way I spoke. My voice felt steadier, more grounded, less hurried. I listened more deeply to my students, not just to correct their English, but to understand their emotions, their struggles, their stories. When one of them hesitated, searching for the right word, I did not rush to fill the silence. I let it breathe, knowing that sometimes meaning emerges from that quiet. During a break, I found myself thinking again about the question that had guided me the night before. Why do I feel empty after work? I realized that part of the answer lies in the way we structure our days. We give our energy outward, often without creating space to process, to reflect, to replenish. We move from one task to the next, from one role to another, without pausing to ask ourselves how we truly feel. I walked to the window and looked outside at the small courtyard where a few students stood chatting. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of a tall tree, creating moving patterns on the ground. I felt a quiet sense of connection, not only to them, but to everyone who has ever felt drained, unseen, or disconnected after a long day. In that moment, I understood that emptiness after work does not have to be something we avoid or fear. It can be a teacher, a guide, a gentle reminder to return to ourselves. It invites us to slow down, to listen, to care for our inner world as much as we care for our outer responsibilities. Later in the day, I led a speaking activity where students described their evenings after work or school. As they shared, I noticed how many of them used similar words: tired, empty, quiet, alone, restless. Yet, beneath those words, there was also something else, a longing for peace, for meaning, for connection. I encouraged them to explore that feeling in English, not as a problem to solve, but as an experience to express. I told them that language is not just about correct sentences, but about giving shape to our inner lives. When we say, "I feel empty," we are already taking a step toward understanding ourselves more deeply. We are practicing awareness, honesty, and vulnerability, all of which are powerful forms of communication. As the day drew to a close, I felt more prepared for the evening than I had the day before. I knew that emptiness might return, but I also knew I could meet it with kindness rather than resistance. I imagined myself again at my small table, tea in hand, watching the city lights emerge, and instead of dreading that moment, I felt a quiet acceptance. On my way home, the train was just as crowded, just as noisy, yet inside me there was a different rhythm. I stood holding the pole, feeling the gentle sway of the carriage, and I breathed slowly. Steadily, I looked around at the faces around me and wondered how many of them would feel that familiar emptiness when they reached their doors. When I arrived home, I followed the same simple ritual as before, placing my bag down, washing my hands, filling the kettle. But this time, I did not wait for emptiness to appear. I sat with myself from the beginning, aware, present, attentive. I poured my tea and carried it to the window, noticing how the sky shifted from pale blue to soft orange. As I sat there, I reflected on how this question, "Why do I feel empty after work?" had become more than just a personal curiosity. It had become a doorway into deeper understanding, not only of myself, but of the human experience. I realized that in asking this question, I was not seeking a single fixed answer, but engaging in an ongoing conversation with my own inner world. I thought about you again, listening to this, perhaps recognizing your own experiences in mine. Maybe you have felt that same quiet emptiness, that same sense of something missing at the end of a long day. I want you to know that you are not alone in that feeling, and that it does not make you weak or ungrateful. It makes you sensitive, reflective, alive. I placed my hand over my heart and felt its steady beat, a reminder that beneath every emotion, every exhaustion, every emptiness, there is still life, still presence, still possibility. I allowed myself to simply be, without judgment, without pressure, without expectation. In that stillness, I felt a gentle gratitude, not for what I had achieved that day, but for the simple fact of being here, breathing, seeing, feeling. I realized that even emptiness can be meaningful when we approach it with openness rather than fear. And as night gradually settled in again, I welcomed it not as an end, but as a natural part of the cycle, a space for rest, reflection, and renewal. I knew that tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own moments of fullness and emptiness, and I felt ready to meet them with a calmer heart. Because in the end, learning English, learning life, learning ourselves, is not about avoiding difficult feelings, but about developing the awareness and language to sit with them, to understand them, and to grow through them. That night, after finishing my tea, I did something small but meaningful. I did not turn on the television, I did not open my phone, and I did not rush into preparing for tomorrow. Instead, I sat at the table and simply watched the darkness settle outside my window. The room felt quiet in a way that was not empty, but spacious, as if it were gently holding me. I could hear my own breathing, slow and steady, and I realized how rarely I truly listened to it during the day. I began to think about all the moments that had filled my hours, the conversations, the corrections, the laughter, the quiet struggles my students shared with me. I pictured their faces one by one, not with the eye of a teacher evaluating progress, but with the heart of someone who cares about their journeys. I felt a subtle warmth in my chest, a reminder that even when work leaves me feeling drained, it also connects me to something deeply human. I leaned back in my chair and let my gaze rest on the ceiling, where the soft light from the lamp created gentle shadows. I wondered how many people around the world were sitting like this at the same moment, feeling the same blend of tiredness and reflection. The thought made me feel less alone, as if an invisible thread connected us all through this shared experience of being human at the end of a long day. I remembered a time, years ago, when I first moved to a new city to teach. I was young, ambitious, and determined to prove myself. I worked tirelessly, saying yes to every opportunity, every extra class, every additional responsibility. At the time, I believed that feeling empty after work meant I was doing something wrong, that I should always feel energized if I truly loved my job. But now, sitting here in the quiet, I understood that emptiness had simply been my body and mind asking for balance, something I had not yet learned to give. I smiled softly at that younger version of myself, not with regret, but with compassion. He was trying his best, just as you are trying your best now. He did not yet know that rest is not a weakness, that stillness is not wasted time, that feeling empty does not erase the meaning of what you have done. I stood up slowly and walked to the small shelf where I kept a few personal objects. A photograph of my family, a postcard from a former student, a smooth stone I had picked up by a river years ago. I picked up the stone and rolled it gently in my palm, feeling its cool surface. It reminded me of the solidity beneath my feet, of the simple fact that I am here, I exist, I matter, regardless of how productive or full I feel. As I held it, I thought about how language can act like this stone, something tangible we can hold on to when our emotions feel confusing or overwhelming. When we say, "I feel empty after work," we give shape to an experience that might otherwise remain vague and unsettling. We transform an internal sensation into words that can be understood, shared, and reflected upon. I placed the stone back on the shelf and returned to the table, feeling calmer than before. The room seemed to breathe with me, each shadow softening, each sound becoming more distant. I realized that this was not just an end to my day, but a kind of gentle transition, a bridge between effort and rest. Later, when I lay in bed, I did not rush to sleep. I closed my eyes and allowed images from the day to drift through my mind, like leaves floating on water. I did not cling to any of them. I simply watched them pass. In that space between wakefulness and sleep, I felt a deep sense of peace, as if my mind and body were finally in harmony. In the days that followed, I carried this awareness with me. When I felt the first hints of emptiness creeping in during the afternoon, I did not ignore them. I paused for a few seconds, took a slow breath, and reminded myself that this feeling was not an enemy, but a signal. Sometimes I would take a short walk. Sometimes I would sip water more slowly. Sometimes I would simply sit quietly for a moment and let my thoughts settle. I noticed how this changed not only my evenings, but my teaching as well. I became more patient with myself and with my students. When someone struggled to find the right word, I saw it not as a problem to fix quickly, but as a natural part of learning, of thinking, of being human. The classroom felt less like a place of performance and more like a shared space of exploration. One afternoon, as the sun slanted through the windows, I asked my students a simple question in English: "How do you feel after work?" Their answers were hesitant at first, but slowly they opened up. One said, "I feel tired, but also proud." Another said, "I feel empty, like you described." A third admitted, "I feel lonely, even though I am surrounded by people all day." As they spoke, I listened deeply, not interrupting, not correcting unless necessary, simply honoring their words. I realized in that moment that our shared vulnerability created a powerful connection, not just between teacher and students, but among all of us. We were not just practicing English, we were practicing empathy, awareness, and emotional honesty. The language became a bridge between our inner worlds, allowing us to see ourselves and each other more clearly. As I walked home that evening, I felt a quiet gratitude for these small revelations. The city looked the same as always, busy, noisy, alive. Yet inside me there was a steadiness I had not felt before. I moved through the crowd without tension, without rushing, simply present in each step. At home, I followed my familiar ritual again, but now it felt almost sacred, a daily return to myself. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the sky shift colors, and instead of fearing emptiness, I welcomed whatever arose. Some evenings, I felt calm. Some evenings, I felt reflective. And occasionally, I still felt that quiet, hollow space inside. But each time, I met it with kindness. I began to see emptiness not as a void, but as a pause, a necessary silence between notes in a piece of music. Without that silence, the melody would lose its shape, its meaning. In the same way, without moments of emptiness, our lives might become a blur of constant activity, lacking depth and awareness. I thought about how this understanding might help you, too, as you navigate your own days. Perhaps when you feel empty after work, you might remember that this feeling is not a sign of failure, but an invitation to slow down, to listen, to care for yourself. You might sit with a warm drink, take a gentle breath, and simply allow yourself to be. I imagined you finding your own small rituals, your own ways of reconnecting with yourself. Maybe you would write in a journal, take a walk under the evening sky, or sit quietly with your thoughts. Whatever you choose, I hope you approach it with the same gentleness you would offer a tired friend. As I continued to reflect, I realized that this question, why do I feel empty after work, had become more than just a theme for a podcast or a personal inquiry. It had become a reminder of what truly matters: presence, balance, compassion, and connection. It had taught me that productivity alone is not enough, that our inner lives deserve just as much attention as our outer achievements. And so, as the days turned into weeks, I carried this lesson with me like a quiet companion. Whenever I felt overwhelmed or drained, I returned to that simple awareness: breathing, noticing, accepting. I trusted that even in emptiness, there was meaning. Even in stillness, there was life. Now, as I speak to you in this moment, I imagine you perhaps closing your eyes or looking out your own window, feeling the rhythm of your breath, sensing your own inner world. I hope that my words have accompanied you gently, like a calm voice in the background, reminding you that your feelings are valid, that your experiences matter, and that you are not alone. Because in the end, learning English is not just about mastering a language. It is about learning to express your humanity with clarity, honesty, and compassion. It is about finding the words that allow you to say, "I feel empty," and knowing that in saying so, you are already taking a step toward deeper understanding and growth. And as night falls once more and the world grows quieter, I invite you to rest, not with pressure, but with trust, trusting that tomorrow will come, that you will meet it with renewed awareness, and that every feeling you experience, even emptiness, has something to teach you. And in that quiet, as the last lights of the city soften and your breath finds its natural rhythm, let yourself simply be where you are, not rushing toward anything, not escaping from anything, just resting inside this moment the way a traveler rests after a long journey, knowing that feeling empty does not mean you have lost something. It often means you have given deeply, lived fully, and are now being invited to return home to yourself. You might notice your heartbeat steady beneath your hand, or the way the air moves gently in and out of your lungs, and you might realize that beneath every day of work, every word you speak in English, every role you play, there is a still, quiet you who is always there, always breathing, always worthy of care. And perhaps tomorrow, when you walk back into your day, you will remember this feeling, not as something heavy, but as something truthful, a reminder to slow down, to listen, to speak with awareness, and to treat yourself with the same kindness you so often offer others. Because you are not just learning English, you are learning how to notice your inner world, how to give language to your experience, and how to move through life with a little more presence. a little more gentleness, and a little more trust in yourself. So wherever you are now, let your shoulders soften, let your mind rest, and let the quiet do its gentle work. This is English with Thomas. I'm Thomas. Keep speaking, keep growing, and keep trusting yourself.